The weeds you poisoned with toxic chemicals last weekend might have been the exact same plants your great-grandmother relied on to keep her family alive during the Great Depression. We traded our independence for convenience. We let big agriculture and pharmaceutical empires bury centuries of self-reliance under asphalt and synthetic prescriptions, replacing free, wild medicine with expensive pills. Today, we take back what modern life stole from you. Wait until we reach the 17th plant on our list, a common driveway weed that acts as a potent natural coagulant, sealing wounds in seconds. And you simply will not believe the 20th plant, a root hiding in plain sight that Native Americans used to survive brutal winters and ward off severe respiratory infections. Join the community of people who choose to remember what the rest of the world so carelessly forgot by subscribing now. Here are 20 perennial medicinal vegetables growing wild across America, ranked from remarkable to absolutely unforgettable. Number 1. Dandelion. The ancient Egyptians and early Greeks, dating back to 300 BC, deliberately cultivated the vibrant, bitter dandelion. They prized it not just as a reliable daily food source, but as a vital liver tonic essential for survival. The post-war suburban boom and industrial lawn care companies in the 1950s orchestrated a brilliant marketing campaign to convince homeowners this vital crop was an ugly weed. They built a massive chemical empire designed solely to eradicate a free, health-sustaining food source. Modern clinical studies show the thick root is packed with inulin, a prebiotic fiber that actively regulates blood sugar spikes. Laboratory research confirms the leaves act as a powerful natural diuretic that, unlike synthetic water pills, does not deplete your body of essential potassium. You can easily harvest the tender, early spring leaves for a nutrient-dense salad. Alternatively, dig up and slow roast the thick taproots to brew a rich, dark, caffeine-free coffee substitute that heavily stimulates sluggish digestion. Always avoid harvesting these greens from public parks or suburban lawns treated with commercial herbicides. The deep taproots readily absorb and permanently store those dangerous toxic chemicals. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free for 4,000 years. Number 2. Purslane. The ancient Persians, roughly 2,000 years ago, revered the creeping succulent known as purslane. They named it kurfa and deliberately cultivated it across arid landscapes as a sacred, deeply hydrating vegetable during punishing droughts. When grocery stores centralized our food system in the mid-20th century, fragile wild greens were rapidly abandoned for transportable iceberg lettuce. This incredible nutrient powerhouse was officially demoted to an invasive garden nuisance. Modern nutritional research confirms this humble crawler contains more heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy vegetable on Earth. Clinical studies show its incredibly high melatonin content actively reduces cellular inflammation and safely regulates disrupted sleep cycles. You can snap off the thick, fleshy, reddish stems and paddle-shaped leaves right from the dirt. Toss them raw into a summer salad for a crisp, slightly sour, lemon-like crunch that actively cools the body. It shares a highly similar growing environment with spurge, a dangerous toxic lookalike that leaks a milky white sap when snapped. Always ensure the stem juices run completely clear before eating. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her kitchen. We forgot to ask her why. Number 3. Jerusalem artichoke. Long before European settlers arrived, indigenous tribes of the North American plains, specifically the Huron, actively farmed the towering Jerusalem artichoke. By the 1500s, this perennial sunflower was a vital, staple winter survival crop. During the industrialization of mass agriculture, farmers favored the faster-growing, easier-to-store South American potato. This native, deeply resilient tuber was aggressively phased out of our commercial diets simply to maximize corporate profits. Current medical research confirms these knobby roots are densely packed with inulin, a highly unique carbohydrate. Studies show this specific fiber passes through the human digestive system without severely spiking blood glucose, making it a critical tool for diabetic management. You can dig up the crisp, pale tubers in late autumn immediately after the first hard frost. Slice them incredibly thin and eat them raw for a sweet, water chestnut crunch, or slowly roast them like traditional potatoes. Consuming large quantities of raw sunchokes when your body is unaccustomed to high inulin levels will cause severe, painful gastrointestinal distress and intense, uncomfortable bloating. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. Number 4. Chicory. The ancient Romans, under the guidance of Horace and Virgil around 30 BC, heavily relied on the bright blue-flowered perennial called chicory. They cultivated it across the Mediterranean as a crucially important blood-purifying vegetable. The rapid rise of cheap, imported coffee and mass-produced synthetic digestive aids in the early 1900s pushed this resilient plant to the literal margins of our highways. Convenience simply overruled centuries of effective medicinal tradition. Documented evidence indicates the bitter compounds found in the leaves actively stimulate intense bile production. Studies show this specific biological process drastically improves liver function and vastly accelerates the breakdown of heavy dietary fats within the body. You can forage the young, dandelion-like leaves in early spring long before the tall stalk appears. Blanch them briefly in boiling salted water to successfully tame the intense bitterness, then sauté with garlic for a potent digestive side dish. While generally safe, excessive consumption of the highly concentrated root extracts can rapidly trigger premature uterine contractions. Pregnant women should strictly avoid medicinal doses of this specific wild botanical. This one is still growing across most of the U.S. Right now the question is whether you will recognize it. Number 5. Stinging nettle. Bronze Age civilizations in Northern Europe, dating back over 3,000 years, utilized every single part of the aggressive stinging nettle. They spun the tough outer fibers into durable clothing and aggressively boiled the greens for vital winter nutrition. As synthetic textiles and laboratory-created antihistamines quickly flooded the modern market, we developed a profound, unnatural fear of the wild. We blindly decided a plant that demands respect was just a weed that needed immediate chemical eradication. Extensive clinical research confirms the jagged leaves are densely packed with natural antihistamines. Double-blind studies show that consuming freeze-dried extracts of this exact plant significantly reduces inflammatory pathways associated with severe seasonal allergies and chronic joint pain. You must harvest the top 4 leaves wearing thick, protective leather gloves. Once you submerge the greens in rapidly boiling water for 60 seconds, the defensive stingers completely dissolve, leaving a rich, spinach-like superfood you can safely eat. Never consume the mature leaves after the plant has flowered and gone to seed. At this late stage, microscopic crystalline particles form in the foliage that can severely irritate your sensitive urinary tract. Most Americans touch this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. Number 6. Burdock. Traditional Chinese practitioners and medieval European herbalists around the 12th century highly valued the massive biennial known as burdock. They systematically cultivated the incredibly deep taproots specifically to clear toxic heat from the blood and skin. When 20th century dermatology began favoring patented steroid creams and synthetic antibiotic ointments, holistic botanical blood purifiers were completely dismissed as unscientific peasant folklore. We traded deep internal healing for superficial, temporary chemical band-aids. Modern pharmacological research confirms the root is an absolute powerhouse of active antioxidants, specifically including quercetin and luteolin. Studies show these chemical compounds actively pull toxins directly from the bloodstream while significantly reducing inflammatory markers in chronic skin conditions like severe eczema. You can dig the first-year roots in late fall, easily peeling away the tough, earthy exterior. Shred the crisp white core and stir-fry it with sesame oil and soy sauce to create a delicious, intensely liver-supporting winter vegetable. This plant frequently grows in disturbed, contaminated soils near abandoned industrial sites or busy highways. The massive taproot acts exactly like a sponge, aggressively absorbing heavy metals and dangerous pollutants directly from the earth. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free for 4,000 years. Number 7. Broadleaf plantain. Anglo-Saxon tribes in the very first century deeply revered broadleaf plantain as one of their 9 sacred herbs. They affectionately named it waybread, carrying the tiny seeds on massive migrations to ensure they always had highly reliable medicine. The obsessive, post-war pursuit of the perfect, uniform, grass-only suburban lawn turned this miraculous natural healer into public enemy number 1. Chemical giants spent millions of dollars convincing you it was just an ugly, invasive driveway weed. Rigorous dermatological research confirms the broad green leaves contain incredibly high levels of allantoin. Clinical studies show this specific biochemical compound actively accelerates human cellular regeneration, significantly reducing healing times for minor wounds, angry insect stings, and localized skin infections. You can pick a fresh, clean leaf and chew it briefly to successfully release the active enzymes, creating a traditional poultice. Apply this green paste directly to a fresh bee sting. Wrap it tight with a simple cloth bandage. The soothing anti-inflammatory relief is almost instantaneous and reliably lasts for hours, actively pulling the dangerous venom from the skin. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her kitchen. We forgot to ask her why. Number 8. Groundnut. Indigenous Algonquian tribes along the eastern seaboard relied heavily on the nitrogen-fixing groundnut vine for over 2 millennia. They named it hopness and utilized the protein-dense underground tubers as a highly critical staple during punishing, frozen winters. European colonists survived their first brutal winters solely because natives generously shared this exact plant. Yet, as imported wheat took dominance, commercial agriculture completely abandoned this highly nutritious native vegetable because the sprawling vines were simply too difficult to machine harvest. Modern nutritional analysis reveals these wild tubers contain exactly 3 times the protein of a standard commercial potato. Furthermore, research confirms they are incredibly rich in genistein, a potent phytonutrient actively linked to cellular protection and preventing severe osteoporosis. You can easily forage the underground string of tubers along damp riverbanks in late autumn. Boil them thoroughly, peel away the thin skins, and mash them with butter just like potatoes for a deeply satisfying, protein-heavy survival meal. You must never consume these powerful tubers raw. Uncooked, they contain specialized protease inhibitors that severely disrupt human digestion and will cause violent stomach cramps and intense nausea within a few hours. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. Number 9. Wild leeks. The Cherokee and Iroquois nations deeply cherished the pungent forest perennial known as wild leeks for thousands of years. Emerging just as the snow finally melted, they celebrated its arrival as a critical spring tonic to cleanse sluggish blood after long winters. The aggressive urbanization of eastern forests and the modernization of grocery chains pushed this slow-growing woodland gem into absolute obscurity. We foolishly traded complex, potent wild flavors for watery, mass-produced commercial onions completely lacking any true medicinal value. Laboratory research confirms these broad green leaves possess intense, documented antimicrobial properties. Studies show they are incredibly rich in camphorol, a powerful flavonoid that actively protects delicate blood vessels from severe oxidative stress and naturally helps regulate chronic high blood pressure. You can sustainably harvest just the upper green leaves in early April, purposely leaving the vital root bulb completely undisturbed in the earth. Sauté the pungent greens lightly in hot butter for a deeply restorative, cholesterol-balancing spring side dish. Because they grow incredibly slowly, taking up to 7 long years to reach maturity, irresponsible harvesting can permanently decimate entire ancient forest colonies. Never dig up the actual bulbs if you want the medicine to survive. This one is still growing across most of the U.S. Right now the question is whether you will recognize it. Number 10. Watercress. Ancient Greek soldiers under the direct command of Hippocrates, around 400 BC, deliberately built their first military hospitals near natural springs. They did this specifically to cultivate watercress as a highly potent blood-cleansing, strength-building daily military ration. As fresh spring water rapidly became piped municipal water heavily treated with chemical chlorine, our profound connection to living aquatic plants completely vanished. The pharmaceutical industry successfully replaced daily, nutrient-dense preventive foods with incredibly expensive, synthesized vitamin pills wrapped in plastic. Extensive cancer research confirms this peppery green contains uniquely high levels of phenethyl isothiocyanate. Clinical studies show this specific compound actively inhibits the rapid growth of tumors and rapidly protects healthy cellular DNA from severe environmental damage. You can easily harvest the floating green stems from fast-moving, crystal-clear, cold water streams. Rinse them thoroughly and use the spicy, pungent leaves as a highly potent base for a detoxifying salad that sharply stimulates sluggish digestion. Never harvest this aquatic plant from stagnant water or agricultural runoff areas. It is notoriously susceptible to liver flukes, a dangerous microscopic parasite that can severely infect the human biliary tract if unwashed greens are consumed raw. Most Americans touch this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. Number 11. Japanese knotweed. Traditional herbalists in East Asia, dating back well over 2 millennia, heavily utilized the aggressively spreading Japanese knotweed. They referred to it as huzhang, meaning tiger cane, deliberately using the deep roots to rapidly clear damp heat and severe systemic infections. When this towering plant was brought to the West, it quickly became an unstoppable invasive nightmare. Our desperate obsession with eradicating it using toxic industrial herbicides completely blinded us to its absolutely incredible medicinal potential. Modern clinical research confirms this invasive root is the world's most concentrated natural source of resveratrol. Documented evidence indicates this powerful chemical compound actively protects the human heart and severely disrupts the internal inflammatory pathways directly associated with chronic Lyme disease. You can easily harvest the thick, orange-colored roots in very early spring or late fall. Scrub them absolutely clean, chop them into small pieces, and simmer them slowly to create an earthy, deeply medicinal tea that aggressively supports cardiovascular health. Do not harvest from public roadways, as local governments relentlessly spray these towering patches with highly toxic chemical defoliants. Ingesting roots from treated areas will introduce severe, dangerous synthetic poisons directly into your bloodstream. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free for 4,000 years. Number 12. Wood sorrel. Indigenous tribes across North America, particularly the Kiowa, heavily relied on the tiny, clover-like perennial called wood sorrel for centuries. They chewed the incredibly delicate heart-shaped leaves on long, exhausting hunts to quickly relieve severe thirst and safely soothe burning mouth sores. Modern commercial agriculture actively trained us to view anything growing between straight rows of profitable cash crops as a bitter enemy. The incredibly aggressive marketing of sugary synthetic sports drinks totally erased our ancient reliance on this natural, hydrating wilderness survival tool. Nutritional research confirms these tiny green leaves are absolutely packed with naturally occurring, highly bioavailable vitamin C. Studies show the specific organic acids present actively bind to internal human tissues, providing rapid, documented relief for severely inflamed gums and severe gastrointestinal upset. You can easily pinch off the small, bright green leaves and tiny yellow flowers directly from the forest floor. Toss them into a fresh salad for a sharp, lemon-like bite, or steep them in cold water for a highly refreshing medicinal tonic. This tart beverage actively floods your internal system with critical, immune-boosting natural antioxidants that laboratory-created synthetic electrolyte powders absolutely cannot match. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her kitchen. We forgot to ask her why. Number 13. Pokeweed. Appalachian settlers and Native American tribes deeply respected the towering, purple-stem perennial known as pokeweed. They meticulously gathered the absolute earliest spring shoots, expertly preparing them as a famous dish called poke salad to completely revitalize the human body after long, harsh winters. The precise, multi-step boiling process strictly required to render this plant safe became entirely too tedious for the modern fast food generation. As processed microwave dinners totally took over, this highly potent medicinal food was quickly labeled a deadly, untouchable toxic weed. Cutting-edge laboratory research confirms the massive roots contain highly unique, heavily documented antiviral proteins. Documented evidence indicates these specific natural proteins actively stimulate the human immune system and drastically inhibit cellular division in certain aggressive viral strains when strictly utilized in isolated medical environments. You must only harvest the absolute youngest green shoots in early spring before any red color appears on the stalk. You boil them vigorously in water, discard the dark water entirely, and repeat this strict process 3 complete times before eating safely. This plant is extremely dangerous. The mature purple stalks, dark roots, and glossy black berries contain highly lethal phytolactotoxin. Eating them improperly prepared will immediately cause severe, violent convulsions, massive respiratory failure, and potentially death. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. Number 14. Wild asparagus. Ancient Mediterranean civilizations, dating as far back as 3000 BC, heavily prized the towering, feathery perennial wild asparagus. Egyptian royalty routinely offered massive bundles of these wild spears directly to their gods, recognizing them as a supreme, highly natural diuretic and powerfully restorative kidney tonic. Once mass commercial farming successfully hybridized and domesticated this delicate plant for perfectly straight supermarket stalks, the wild, highly medicinal ancestral version was entirely ignored. We foolishly traded incredible, dense nutritional survival power for mere visual perfection and highly profitable shipping convenience. Modern medical research confirms the wild stalks contain truly massive amounts of glutathione, a highly potent master antioxidant. Clinical studies show this specific compound actively binds to dangerous cellular free radicals and deeply embedded heavy metals, flushing them safely and completely out of the human liver. You can easily spot the towering, dried yellow ferns in the dead of winter, then return to that exact ditch in early spring to successfully harvest tender new shoots. Steam them lightly and eat them immediately to fully absorb the highly volatile, water-soluble nutrients. Do not ever confuse the early spring spears with the highly toxic shoots of young baptisia, also heavily known as false indigo. Eating the wrong spear will immediately induce violent gastrointestinal distress and severe neurological symptoms requiring immediate hospitalization. This one is still growing across most of the U.S. right now. The question is whether you will recognize it. You are likely starting to notice a distinct pattern here. This vital botanical knowledge was not lost by mere accident. It was actively replaced by massive industries that heavily profit from your daily dependence. Tell me in the comments which vegetable on this list shocked you the most and why. I read every single one, and by openly sharing your thoughts, you are actively participating in the permanent preservation of this rapidly disappearing wisdom. Now let us dive into the final, most heavily suppressed wild plants on our list. Number 15, daylily. Ancient Chinese physicians, over 2,000 years ago, heavily cultivated the vibrant, orange-flowered daylily strictly for essential medicinal survival. They documented its highly potent roots and incredibly tight flower buds in early medical texts as an absolutely essential botanical treatment for severe grief and crippling insomnia. When uniform suburban landscaping trends heavily swept across America in the 1950s, this incredibly powerful medicine was tragically reduced to a mere decorative border plant. The massive pharmaceutical industry certainly did not want you finding completely free, highly natural anxiety relief casually growing in your own driveway. Current pharmacological research confirms the completely unopened flower buds contain highly unique, heavily documented neuroprotective compounds. Studies show these specific phytochemicals actively interact with essential serotonin receptors in the human brain, providing fully documented, highly natural stabilization for severely disrupted sleep patterns and mild depressive episodes. You can easily harvest the incredibly tight, completely unopened green flower buds in early summer. Sauté them briefly in hot butter with wild garlic to perfectly create a delicious, mildly sweet vegetable dish that actively calms the entire central nervous system before you sleep. You must absolutely ensure you are strictly harvesting true hemerocallis and absolutely not true lilies or highly toxic iris varieties. Consuming the roots or leaves of a true lily will rapidly cause catastrophic, completely irreversible kidney failure within mere hours. Most Americans touch this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. Number 16, cattail. Native American tribes systematically utilized the towering aquatic grass known as cattail for roughly 10 millennia. They famously called it the absolute supermarket of the swamp, completely relying on its massive starchy root systems for critical, life-saving winter survival. As we rapidly drain millions of acres of natural wetlands to forcefully build massive concrete subdivisions, we permanently destroyed our ancient access to this absolutely crucial survival crop. Modern civilization blindly decided a highly sterile, heavily paved landscape was infinitely more valuable than a completely free, endlessly abundant food source. Nutritional research confirms the incredibly thick rhizomes actively produce a highly digestible, completely gluten-free survival starch. Laboratory studies show the sticky, gel-like substance naturally found directly between the young leaves possesses profound, highly natural antiseptic properties, actively halting the rapid spread of severe topical bacterial infections. You can dig up the massive root systems in very late autumn, dry them completely, and pound them aggressively into a highly nutritious, incredibly dense survival flour. Alternatively, quickly apply the clear, sticky gel from the stem directly to an open, bleeding wound to actively prevent severe infection. Because these incredible plants aggressively filter highly polluted water, never harvest them near toxic industrial runoff areas or incredibly busy highways. The roots permanently trap deadly heavy metals and highly toxic chemical pesticides directly inside the edible starch. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free for 4,000 years. Number 17. Yarrow. Ancient Greek medics during the Trojan War, roughly around 1100 BC, heavily relied on the feathery perennial known as yarrow. Legend states Achilles himself actively used the heavily crushed leaves to rapidly stop the severe, life-threatening bleeding of his wounded soldiers directly on the brutal battlefield. When highly modern synthetic bandages and liquid chemical coagulants utterly dominated 20th century first aid kits, this incredibly powerful battlefield medicine was casually discarded as a mere driveway weed. We carelessly threw away centuries of critical, life-saving trauma knowledge for cheap, mass-produced plastic packaging. Modern pharmacological research confirms the highly fragrant leaves contain an incredibly potent chemical compound called achillean. Clinical studies show this highly specific alkaloid actively accelerates human blood clotting at a truly profound rate, significantly reducing massive blood loss from incredibly severe, deep physical lacerations. You can harvest the young, deeply fern-like leaves, dry them completely, and crush them aggressively into a very fine, highly medicinal powder. Pack this completely dry green powder directly into an incredibly deep, actively bleeding cut to instantly trigger natural coagulation and safely seal the wound. Pregnant women must absolutely and completely avoid ingesting any internal preparations of this incredibly powerful plant. The highly volatile essential oils actively stimulate the entire pelvic region and can rapidly induce incredibly severe, highly dangerous uterine contractions directly leading to unexpected premature labor. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her kitchen. We forgot to ask her why. Number 18. Ostrich fern. Indigenous tribes of the northeastern forests, particularly the Wabanaki Confederacy, intensely celebrated the emergence of tightly coiled ostrich fern fronds for centuries. They systematically harvested them in very early spring as a highly critical, deeply nutrient-dense survival vegetable exactly after long, incredibly brutal periods of absolute starvation. The massive industrialization of our modern produce aisles completely eliminated highly seasonal wild greens that absolutely could not survive a 2-week truck ride across the country. Our incredibly modern diets completely lost this strictly crucial, deeply mineralizing spring tonic strictly for highly profitable logistical convenience. Nutritional research confirms these incredibly tightly wound green coils contain strictly high concentrations of absolutely essential omega-3 fatty acids and deeply powerful antioxidants. Studies show regular consumption actively reduces internal cellular inflammation and heavily supports incredibly severe, highly chronic immune system deficiencies. You must carefully harvest the highly bright green coils in very early spring strictly while they are incredibly tightly wound, roughly 2 inches absolutely above the dirt. Boil them incredibly vigorously for exactly 15 minutes, then sauté them in hot butter for a deeply rich survival vegetable. You must strictly identify the incredibly smooth, deeply green, U-shaped stem. Do not ever mistakenly harvest highly dangerous bracken fern unrolling directly in the exact same area. Bracken ferns contain tequilicide, a highly aggressive, deeply documented carcinogen strictly causing incredibly severe, totally irreversible stomach cancer. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it. Number 19. Yellow dock. Early Roman physicians and traditional Native American healers independently recognized the incredibly massive healing power of the rusty-colored perennial yellow dock. It was completely established as the premier botanical treatment strictly for highly severe anemia and deeply sluggish liver function, roughly around the very first century. When severe anemia ultimately became a highly medicated condition treated entirely with synthetic, laboratory-created iron pills, this highly bioavailable wild weed was strictly abandoned. The massive medical establishment utterly dismissed natural, deeply root-based iron absorption completely in favor of highly profitable, strictly patented pharmaceutical prescriptions. Modern clinical research confirms this highly bitter taproot contains incredibly high levels of strictly bioavailable iron and deeply powerful anthraquinones. Documented evidence perfectly indicates it actively pulls absolutely essential minerals directly from the deep soil, actively delivering them directly to the human bloodstream while gently stimulating incredibly sluggish bowels. You can successfully dig the truly massive yellow taproots in very late autumn, scrub them aggressively, and heavily chop them into incredibly tiny pieces. Simmer them incredibly slowly in boiling water to absolutely create a dark, intensely earthy, highly iron-rich medicinal syrup that rapidly cures truly profound winter fatigue. The incredibly broad green leaves actively contain very high amounts of highly concentrated oxalic acid. Individuals with a strictly known history of highly severe kidney stones must absolutely never consume the strictly raw leaves, as concentrated oxalates will rapidly crystallize directly within the delicate human urinary tract. This one is still growing across most of the U.S. Right now, the question is whether you will recognize it. Number 20. Marshmallow root. Ancient Egyptian healers, dating precisely back to 2000 BC, heavily guarded the towering, velvet-leafed perennial marshmallow root strictly as a deeply sacred medical secret. Native American tribes systematically utilized highly similar wild mallow roots to safely survive truly brutal winters and actively ward off highly fatal respiratory infections. In the very late 1800s, massive candy manufacturers strictly stole the exact name of this truly profound medicinal root, completely replacing its highly healing natural extract entirely with incredibly cheap gelatin and highly processed white sugar. Modern society absolutely forgot the incredibly popular campfire treat was completely originally a highly potent, life-saving botanical cough medicine. Extensive pharmacological research specifically confirms the incredibly thick roots deeply contain truly massive amounts of highly complex mucilage polysaccharides. Clinical studies absolutely show this incredibly thick, intensely gel-like substance actively coats severely inflamed mucous membranes, rapidly suppressing incredibly violent dry coughs and actively healing deeply ulcerated internal digestive tracts. You can carefully dig the incredibly thick, deeply pale taproots in exact dead of absolute winter. Chop them incredibly finely and successfully soak them strictly overnight in deeply cold water. The clear liquid entirely transforms directly into a highly thick, intensely soothing medicinal gel that instantly relieves incredibly severe, heavily burning sore throats. Because this powerful mucilage perfectly forms such an incredibly thick protective barrier directly over your extremely sensitive internal digestive tract, it will severely block the highly critical absorption of other oral medications. Never carefully take this highly potent root precisely within 2 strict hours of successfully consuming critically important daily prescription drugs. Most Americans touch this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. We have been systematically conditioned to look for salvation strictly in plastic bottles and highly sterile pharmacy aisles, completely blind to the absolutely profound, incredibly living medicine chest completely surrounding our own homes. These 20 plants are absolutely not mere weeds. They are the ancient, incredibly enduring botanical infrastructure that completely allowed humanity to successfully survive devastating plagues, truly brutal famines, and incredibly punishing winters. Recognizing them again is the truly ultimate act of aggressively reclaiming your absolute independence entirely from a completely broken medical system that aggressively profits strictly off your continued, highly engineered ignorance. Your incredible challenge starting exactly today is to boldly step directly out your own back door, aggressively walk right past your perfectly manicured chemical grass, and successfully identify exactly one strictly wild plant you previously used to blindly spray with highly toxic chemicals. Hit the like button absolutely right now strictly if successfully learning this deeply lost history permanently changed exactly how you truly think completely about the incredible weeds casually growing in your own yard. Tell me directly in the active comments, are you actively going to immediately start safely foraging strictly for these deeply wild medicinal vegetables, or are you absolutely still far too intensely hesitant strictly about accidentally misidentifying them? Finally, hit subscribe immediately to successfully join a rapidly growing community of highly independent people who deliberately choose to deeply remember exactly what the completely distracted rest of the highly modern world so incredibly carelessly absolutely forgot. The deeply powerful medicine you absolutely need strictly the most is probably patiently waiting entirely for you strictly right now, simply growing completely quietly directly in the exact cracks of your own highly ordinary driveway.